My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for the past 7 years, my family has treated me like I'm invisible unless they need something to criticize. It started when I was 22 and told them I wasn't going to law school like my brother Marcus or medical school like my sister Victoria. I wanted to work in property management. Property management? Dad had laughed at that family dinner. You mean being a janitor with a clipboard? Mom had been more direct. We didn't raise you to collect rent checks, Sarah. That's not a real career. Marcus, 3 years older and already a corporate attorney, had smirked into his wine glass. At least someone has to do the grunt work, I suppose. Victoria, 2 years younger but already in her residency, had simply shaken her head with practiced disappointment. I just think you're capable of more, that's all. But I wasn't interested in what they thought I was capable of. I was interested in buildings, in investments, in the quiet accumulation of real assets while everyone else chased prestigious titles. So I took a job as an assistant property manager at a small apartment complex in downtown Portland, making $38,000 a year, and I listened to my family's jokes about my exciting career managing toilets and trash. What they didn't know was that I'd been investing every spare dollar since I was 19. While they'd been spending their trust fund distributions on cars and vacations, I'd been buying fractional shares in apartment buildings through a private investment group I'd found online. Small shares at first. A 3% stake here, a 5% stake there. Buildings in neighborhoods nobody wanted yet, but I could see the development patterns, the transit lines being planned, the rezoning proposals. By the time I was 25, I owned minority stakes in 7 buildings. By 27, I'd consolidated into majority ownership of 3 smaller complexes. And at 29, I'd done something my family still didn't know about. I'd purchased the Riverside Towers, a 127-unit luxury apartment building in the Pearl District, for $42 million through my LLC Mitchell Property Holdings. The building where I lived in Unit 4B. The building my family thought I was barely affording on my assistant manager salary. I kept it quiet for a simple reason. I wanted to build something real before they could tear it down with their opinions. I wanted to be so successful that their dismissals would be irrelevant. And I wanted to watch them just once realize they'd been completely wrong about me. I never imagined they'd hand me that opportunity so spectacularly. The Riverside Towers purchase had been the culmination of everything I'd learned. The previous owner was retiring and wanted a quick, clean sale. I'd secured financing through a commercial lender who'd reviewed my portfolio and my business plan and seen what my family never had. I knew exactly what I was doing. The building was 87% occupied when I bought it. Within 18 months, I'd renovated common areas, upgraded building security, added amenities, and brought occupancy to 98%. The property value had increased to $58 million according to the latest appraisal. My equity position was worth approximately $23 million after debt. But to my family, I was still Sarah, the apartment manager, who couldn't afford nice things. I drove a 7-year-old Honda Civic because it was reliable and I didn't care about impressing anyone. I wore simple clothes because I worked in property management and spent half my day dealing with maintenance issues. I lived in a modest 1-bedroom unit because I didn't need space I wouldn't use. My family saw poverty. I saw strategy. I had a small, trusted team who knew the truth. Jennifer Hartwick, my attorney, had structured the LLC and handled all legal matters. David Chin, my property manager, ran day-to-day operations. Maria Gonzalez, my accountant, managed the finances. And Tom Bradley, my building security director, kept everything running smoothly. To the residents, I was just Sarah from 4B who sometimes helped out in the office. To my team, I was the owner who'd built something remarkable while staying completely under the radar. The system worked perfectly until my parents decided to visit unannounced. It was a Saturday morning in October when my mother called. "We're in Portland for the weekend," she announced. "Your father has a medical conference. We'll stop by your apartment this afternoon." I'd learned not to argue with my mother's pronouncements. "Sure, Mom. I'll be here." "We'd like to see where you're living," she continued. "It's been 2 years since you moved to this building and we've never seen it." That was intentional on my part, but I couldn't say that. "It's just a 1-bedroom, Mom. Nothing special." "I'm sure it's fine for your budget," she said, and I could hear the pity in her voice. They arrived at 2 p.m. and I'd deliberately done nothing to prepare. My apartment was clean but simple. Basic furniture, no artwork, Nothing that would contradict their narrative about my struggling financial situation. Mom walked in and immediately started cataloging deficiencies. "Oh, Sarah. This is quite compact. And the furniture is very simple." Dad was examining the windows. "How much are you paying for this place?" "It's manageable," I replied calmly. "Manageable probably means you're spending 40% of your income on rent," Marcus said. He'd apparently been invited to this ambush as well. "That's not financially sustainable, Sarah." Victoria, also present, was poking around my kitchen. "Do you have enough saved for emergencies? What if you lose your job?" I smiled politely. "I'm fine, Victoria." "Really?" But Dad wasn't done. He'd found a letter on my counter, a routine notice from the building management about upcoming exterior renovations. Says here they're doing major construction. Your rent is probably going to increase significantly. "I'm aware," I replied calmly. "You know," Mom said, settling onto my modest couch, "we've been talking and we're concerned about your living situation. This building, your job, your complete lack of financial progress. You're 31 years old, Sarah. You should be established by now." "I am established," I said quietly. Marcus laughed. "Established? You're renting a one-bedroom apartment and working as an assistant manager. Sarah, that's not established. That's treading water." "We want to help you," Dad added. "We think it's time you moved home for a while, saved some money, figured out a real career path." "I have a career," I replied calmly. "You have a job," Victoria corrected. "There's a difference." I was about to respond when Mom delivered the line that changed everything. "In fact," she said, pulling out her phone, "we've already spoken to a realtor friend. There's a lovely studio apartment in a more affordable neighborhood. You could cut your rent in half, save money, maybe finally go back to school for something practical." "I don't need a studio apartment," I replied calmly. "Sarah, pride isn't going to pay your bills," Dad said firmly. "We're trying to help you before you end up in real trouble. What happens when this building decides you're not worth keeping around?" That was when I made my decision. Not in anger but in simple clarity. They weren't going to stop. They weren't capable of seeing me differently. The only way forward was to show them the truth in a way they couldn't dismiss. "Thank you for your concern," I replied calmly. "I'll consider everything you've said." They left satisfied, convinced they'd staged a successful intervention. Marcus texted me that evening, "Listen to them, Sarah. They're just trying to help." I didn't respond. The real problem started 3 days later when Dad called. "Sarah, we need to talk about your apartment situation. Your mother and I have been discussing this and we've made a decision." "What decision?" I asked calmly. "We're going to help you whether you accept it or not," he declared. "We've contacted your building management. We're prepared to pay to break your lease so you can move somewhere more affordable." I felt my blood run cold. "You did what?" "We spoke to someone in the office yesterday," Mom added on speakerphone. "We explained that you're our daughter and you're in over your head financially. They were very understanding." David had mentioned a couple asking questions about Unit 4B, but he hadn't known they were my parents. He'd politely told them he couldn't discuss resident information without authorization. That apparently hadn't stopped my parents from deciding they knew better. "Mom, Dad, I don't need you to break my lease," I replied calmly. "We're not asking permission," Dad said firmly. "You're clearly not capable of making sound financial decisions. We're going to speak to the owner of this building directly and explain the situation." "The owner?" I repeated. "Yes, the owner," Mom snapped. "Someone needs to take responsibility here, and since you won't, we will. We're going to that building tomorrow and we're going to demand they let you out of your lease without penalty." I could have told them the truth right then. I could have explained that I was the owner, that I didn't have a lease, that they were about to humiliate themselves spectacularly. But I'd spent years watching them dismiss everything I said. They wouldn't believe me anyway. So instead I replied calmly, "If that's what you feel you need to do." "It is," Dad declared. "And honestly, Sarah, we're also going to ask them about your employment. If you're working as an assistant manager in this building, they should know that you can't afford to live here. It's a conflict of interest." They were going to try to get me evicted and fired. Perfect. I texted Jennifer immediately. "My parents are coming to the building tomorrow to demand I be evicted. They don't know I own it. I think it's time." Jennifer replied within minutes. "I'll prepare the documentation." This should be educational for them. The next morning I deliberately dressed in my usual work clothes. Jeans, a simple sweater, comfortable shoes. I was in the building office reviewing maintenance requests with David when my parents arrived. I heard Dad's voice first, loud and demanding in the lobby. "We need to speak to the owner immediately. This is urgent." I walked out to the hallway and stood quietly watching through the office door window. Mom was there along with Marcus, who'd apparently come for moral support. Victoria mercifully had stayed away. David was at the front desk, professional and calm. "Sir, the owner doesn't typically meet with people without an appointment. Perhaps I can help you." "You're the property manager?" Dad asked dismissively. "I am," David confirmed. "Then you'll do," Mom announced. "We need to discuss your tenant in Unit 4B. Sarah Mitchell. She's our daughter and she's squatting here pretending she can afford this place." I stepped out of the office into the hallway, maintaining distance but within sight. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad." "Sarah, we told you we were handling this," Mom snapped. "Go back to your apartment." "Get use the owner right now," Dad yelled, his face reddening. "My daughter is squatting in Unit 4B. David remained calm. "Sir, Ms. Mitchell is a resident in good standing. I can't discuss." "We want her evicted today," Mom interrupted. "She can't afford this apartment. She's living beyond her means and it's irresponsible. As the property manager, you should know better than to rent to someone who can't pay." I replied calmly, "Noted." Then I pulled out my phone and texted Jennifer. "Jennifer, my parents are demanding my eviction from my own building. Please clarify ownership." Marcus stepped forward using his lawyer voice. "Let me make this simple. Our family is prepared to cover any costs associated with breaking her lease. We just need to speak to the owner about releasing her from her contract." "I can assure you that won't be necessary," David said carefully. "Then get us the owner," Dad demanded. "Right now. Because if they're allowing employees to live in units they can't afford, that's a serious management problem." I stood in the hallway watching it unfold, my phone in my hand. The building's front door opened and Jennifer Hartwick walked in carrying a leather portfolio. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, every inch the corporate attorney. "Good morning," Jennifer said professionally. "I'm Jennifer Hartwick, property attorney for Mitchell Property Holdings, LLC. I understand there's a concern about Unit 4B. Dad turned to her eagerly. "Finally. Yes. We need to speak to the owner about our daughter's tenancy. I'm fully aware of the situation," Jennifer interrupted smoothly. "I've reviewed all documentation related to Unit 4B. "Then you know she can't afford it," Mom said triumphantly. "We're here to help her exit the lease and find appropriate housing." Jennifer opened her portfolio and pulled out several documents. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Miss Sarah Mitchell doesn't have a lease for Unit 4B. Mom looked vindicated. "See? He's squatting. We knew it." "No," Jennifer said clearly. "She doesn't have a lease because she's the owner of the building." The silence was absolute. Dad stared at Jennifer. "What?" Jennifer pulled out the first document. "This is the deed to Riverside Towers, 127 units, recorded with Multnomah County in March 2021. The owner is listed as Mitchell Property Holdings, LLC." She pointed to the signature line. "Sarah Mitchell, managing member." He pulled out a second document. "This is the building's current mortgage statement showing a principal balance of $34 million on a property currently appraised at $58 million. The borrower is Mitchell Property Holdings, LLC, Sarah Mitchell, managing member." A third document. "This is the building's current operating statement showing net operating income of $2.1 million annually, all accruing to the benefit of the owner, Sarah Mitchell." Dad had gone completely pale. His mouth was opening and closing but no sound was coming out. Marcus grabbed the documents from Jennifer's hands. "This has to be a mistake. Sarah couldn't possibly." "I can assure you it's not a mistake," Jennifer said calmly. "I structured the LLC myself in 2019. I've handled all legal matters for Ms. Mitchell's property holdings for the past 6 years." "Property holdings?" Mom whispered. "As in plural?" Jennifer smiled slightly. "Riverside Towers is Ms. Mitchell's primary asset, but she maintains ownership interests in 11 other properties throughout Portland. Her total real estate portfolio is currently valued at approximately $86 million with roughly $31 million in equity. The lobby had gone completely silent. Even the hallway traffic had stopped, residents frozen in place, watching the scene unfold. Victoria had appeared at some point. Apparently she'd come after all, and she was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. "That's impossible," Dad finally managed. "She's an assistant property manager. She makes—" "Ms. Mitchell," Jennifer interrupted, "makes whatever salary she chooses to pay herself from her company. Currently, she draws approximately $95,000 annually for tax efficiency purposes, though her actual income from property operations is considerably higher." I stepped forward calmly. "Hi, Dad." He looked at me like I was a stranger. You own this building?" "I do," I replied calmly. "I've owned it for 3.5 years." "But you said—" Mom started then trailed off. "I said it was manageable," I finished. "It is. I manage it quite well, actually." Marcus was still holding the documents, reading through them frantically. "These are real. This is all." "Sarah, why didn't you tell us?" "You never asked," I replied calmly. "You told me I was a failure. You told me I had no career. You told me I was financially irresponsible. But you never once asked what I was actually doing." "We were trying to help you," Mom protested weakly. "You were trying to fix something that wasn't broken," I corrected gently. "I didn't need cheaper rent. I don't pay rent. I own the building." Dad had found a chair and sat down heavily. "The owner. You're the owner. We demanded to speak to the owner to evict you and you're—" "The owner," I confirmed. "Yes." Jennifer was packing up her documents. "Ms. Mitchell, unless you need anything else, I'll return to the office. I have the documentation if your family would like copies for their records." "Thank you, Jennifer," I said calmly. She nodded professionally and left, her heels clicking across the marble lobby floor. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus was the first to recover. "Sarah, I don't understand. How did you afford a $42 million building?" "Financing," I replied calmly. "And a down payment I'd accumulated through property investments over the previous 8 years. It's called building equity." "But we had no idea," Victoria said quietly. "You never said anything. Would you have believed me if I had?" I asked simply. No one answered, which was answer enough. Mom had tears in her eyes, but they weren't tears of joy. They were tears of humiliation. Everyone here heard. Everyone knows we tried to evict our daughter from her own building. "Yes," I agreed calmly. "They did hear that." "Sarah, we made a mistake," Dad started. "You made an assumption," I corrected. "The same assumption you've been making for 9 years. That I'm incompetent. That I need rescuing. That I couldn't possibly know what I'm doing. We just wanted—" "You wanted me to fit your vision of success," I interrupted gently. "Law school. Medical school. Prestigious career. High-profile job. But that was never who I am. I'm someone who buys buildings. I acquire assets. I build equity. I just did it quietly." Marcus was looking at his phone and his face had gone pale. "Sarah, you're listed as the owner of Pacific Garden Apartments. And Westside Commons. And Hawthorne Square. These are all—" "Mine," I confirmed. "Well, majority stakes in most cases. I've been building a portfolio." "For 9 years," Victoria whispered. "You've been doing this for 9 years and you never told us." "I told you I was in property management," I replied calmly. "I just didn't specify that I was managing my own properties." David, who'd been standing quietly at the desk this entire time, cleared his throat. "Ms. Mitchell, I need to get back to work. Unless you need me." "I'm fine, David." "Thank you," I said. He nodded and disappeared into the office, leaving me alone with my family in the lobby. Dad stood up slowly. "Sarah, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied calmly. "You came here to help me and now you know I don't need help. That's really all there is to it." "But we humiliated ourselves," Mom said quietly. "Everyone heard us. Everyone knows." "Yes," I agreed. "They do." "You could have told us before it got to this point," Marcus said, and there was an edge to his voice now. "You let us walk in here and make fools of ourselves." "I texted you yesterday and told you not to come," I reminded him calmly. You came anyway. Because we thought you needed help. And I told you I didn't, I replied. But you didn't believe me. You never believe me. So yes, I let you come here and demand to speak to the owner. And you found out the owner is me. I'm not sure what else you expected. Victoria was crying now. Sarah, we're your family. You should have trusted us. Trusted you. I repeated quietly. Victoria, 2 weeks ago you asked me if I had enough saved for emergencies. 3 months ago Marcus sent me a link to a financial literacy course because he thought I needed help budgeting. 6 months ago, Mom tried to give me her old furniture because she thought I couldn't afford new pieces. When exactly should I have trusted you to see me as competent? No one had an answer. I pulled my keys from my pocket. I need to get back to work. David and I have a meeting with contractors about the lobby renovation. If you need anything else, you can call Jennifer. She handles all family legal matters now. I started toward the office, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Dad? You asked what happens when the building decides I'm not worth keeping around. I decide that. As I am the building. And I'm worth $58 million. I walked away and left them standing in the lobby of my building, surrounded by residents who'd heard every word, finally understanding what I'd been trying to tell them for 9 years. I wasn't a failure. I was just successful in a way they'd never bothered to recognize. My phone started ringing that evening. First Dad, then Mom, then Marcus, then Victoria. I let them all go to voicemail. Jennifer had advised me to let them process before engaging, and I agreed. The voicemails followed a pattern. Shock, apology, justification, and finally requests to talk. I waited 3 days before responding. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. All 4 of them were there, looking uncomfortable and uncertain in a way I'd never seen before. Sarah, Dad started, we owe you an apology. You do, I agreed calmly. We had no idea, Mom added. We genuinely thought you were struggling. I know you did, I replied. That's the problem. You looked at my life and saw failure because it didn't match your definition of success. You never asked if I was happy. You never asked what my goals were. You just assumed I was lost. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. In our defense, you lived very modestly. You drove an old car. You wore simple clothes. You never showed any signs of wealth. Wealth isn't always visible, I replied calmly. And I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was building something real. But why didn't you tell us? Victoria asked, and she sounded genuinely hurt. Why let us think you were struggling? I considered the question carefully. At first, I was waiting until I had something substantial enough that you couldn't dismiss it. Then I realized you'd dismiss it anyway because you'd already decided who I was. And finally, I stopped caring what you thought because I knew what I'd built. That must have been lonely, Mom said quietly. It was peaceful, I corrected gently. I had my team. I had my work. I had my success. I didn't need validation from people who'd already decided I was failing. Dad rubbed his face. Sarah, I'm proud of you. I should have said that 9 years ago. I should have trusted that you knew what you were doing. Yes, I agreed. You should have. Can we start over? Victoria asked. Can we try to have a real relationship where we actually listen to you? I looked at my family, really looked at them, and saw people who genuinely hadn't understood what they'd been doing. They thought they were helping. They thought they were being supportive. They'd been so convinced of their own worldview that they couldn't see mine. We can try, I said finally. But it has to be different. You have to trust that I know my own life. You have to stop trying to fix things that aren't broken. And you have to accept that my version of success looks different from yours. We can do that, Marcus said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. We'll see, I replied calmly. We talked for another hour and something shifted. Not dramatically but noticeably. They asked questions about my properties, my strategy, my team. They listened to the answers. They were still processing, still adjusting to this new version of me they'd never allowed themselves to see. As we were leaving, Dad pulled me aside. Sir, I have to ask. When we were yelling in that lobby, demanding to speak to the owner, what were you thinking? I smiled slightly. I was thinking that you were about to learn something important. And I was right. What's that? That you never really knew me at all, I replied calmly. But maybe now you'll try. 3 months later things were better. Not perfect but better. My family visited on actual invitations now, not surprise interventions. They asked about my work with genuine interest instead of pity. They stopped trying to fix my life. And I kept doing exactly what I'd always done. Buying buildings, managing properties, building wealth quietly while everyone else chased noise. The story spread through my family's social circle, of course. The daughter they'd dismissed owned an $86 million real estate portfolio. Some people found it amusing. Others found it instructive. I found it irrelevant. I wasn't building wealth to prove anything to anyone. I was building it because I understood something fundamental. Real success doesn't need an audience. It just needs a solid foundation, patient strategy, and the courage to ignore everyone who tells you you're doing it wrong. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 31 years old. I own 127 apartments in downtown Portland and maintain interests in 11 other properties. My family tried to have me evicted from my own building because they couldn't imagine I might actually know what I was doing. They know better now. And I'm still driving my 7-year-old Honda Civic, because it gets me where I need to go, and I don't need anyone's approval to know I've already arrived.